Also tonight, a government program used more than 50 years ago is now causing big problems throughout our state. PCB contamination is being found in communities at alarming rates. Now there is a debate over who is responsible for cleaning it up, even as it threatens a school. CBS 11's Andrea Gusty is live in the studio with the exclusive I-Team investigation. Andrea.
Reagan, during the Cold War, Alaska was key. The Air Force capitalized on our close proximity to the enemy by building 70 communication sites across our state. More than 50 years after the sites were used and more than 30 years after they were abandoned, the ground is still saturated with toxic chemicals. In the 50s, our country was in the grips of the Cold War. Alaska was the first line of defense against the Soviet Union, with a new White Alice communication system to send vital aircraft and missile information to the lower 48.
There was, I think, only one telephone line that actually ran up to Alaska, and they needed a way, and this, at the time, the White Alice sites were the most innovative communication form.
By the late 70s, the Soviet Union was no longer a threat, and the White Alice sites and equipment were abandoned. Equipment filled with PCBs.
The ones who actually dumped PCBs all over the floor because they're very heavy and they were trying to make the transformers lighter, so they didn't know any better. They dumped it out on the floor.
PCBs are a toxic set of chemicals that you can't taste or smell. Health experts believe they can suppress immune systems, cause birth defects, and even cause cancer.
PCB contamination is pretty common at old White Alice sites.
Now, 30 years later, one of the old White Alice sites in Antioch is a school. Generations of kids have played here, unaware of any problem, unaware that the ground is saturated with PCBs.
We used to come across the runway, and the White Alice sites, there's 3 big blocks of them, and back in the trees now, there's a whole bunch of drums. We used to just jump on the drums and play tag and freeze man all over the drums, and sometimes we were crazy enough to, accidentally dump one over when we're jumping on them, and green stuff or black stuff would be coming out of it, and we didn't know any better. In
30 years, things haven't gotten much better. The level of PCBs that the state considers safe, 1 part per million. Scientists have found levels 400 times that at the Antioch school.
Our kids go to school here. This building over here is now Kenter, which also has classes for the high school and junior high students. We use that building. Our high school is right here, and it's close proximity with this hazardous stuff.
The problem is the federal government, the state, and the local organizations can't agree on whose responsibility it is to pay to make the ground safe again.
As you look at, the owner of the material, who not only owned it, but who used it for these hazardous materials, who disposed of them, and every person that touches that has a link in that chain.
The state has decided to clean up the Antioch site now and figure out responsibility later. The Department of Environmental Conservation has hired contractors to fill huge plastic bags with tons of contaminated dirt and rocks. They're finding more contamination than anyone thought.
They are finding a little bit more in the area they're working in right now, which is back behind the Votech building where the old septic system was.
The state has allotted $3.5 million to clean up the site this summer. But with more contamination than expected, that might not be enough, which could mean Antioch students will have to go to school on contaminated ground for another year. Antioch isn't the only site that hasn't been cleaned up in the more than 30 years since it was abandoned by the military. Budget and litigation issues are holding the process up. In the meantime, the PCB contamination is just sitting in the ground. So now the big question, just how dangerous is the PCB contamination at Antioch and the other abandoned White Alice sites? We try to answer that question tomorrow. Live in the studio, I'm Andrea Gusty, CBS 11 News.
All right, thanks so much, Andrea.